Hey! There's a new series of Sex Education out.
Those are my kids!
Regardless of how you feel about the new series, I thought now was a good time to reflect, to think about the series as a whole, what kinds of ideas and motifs it covers, and why it's so beloved and effective.
Say it again!
To me, the fantasy the show presents is this. It makes the viewer feel like their 18-year-old self again, except with a sense of foresight, an all-seeing eye on Anglo-Saxon culture, and much better taste in music. Don't get me wrong, I love Sex Education. The warm glow it gives and the memories it brings back. The show, I mean, not the mortifying one-off school class you had about getting randy. Do give it a watch before coming back to this video. The show, I mean, not the mortifying one-off school class you had about getting randy.
Hyman.
But if you do have a recording of the latter, that raises more questions than it answers. I know video essayists have discussed this show before, but I promise I'm going to dive deep into the cross-the-pond, multi-century world of sex education and uncover just why it tastes so bittersweet.
And here we go.
Oh, well, of course you must have loads of demons!
Okay, so if you haven't seen it, Sex Education is a British comedy drama series available exclusively on Netflix. The series follows the lives of the students, staff, and parents of the fictional Moordale Secondary School through a positive bushel of coming-of-age issues. The protagonist, Otis Milburn, suffers a mother who's a sex therapist, but ends up providing sex therapy himself, assisting students at Moordale through an informal clinic, with the help of school pariah, Maeve Wiley. In the final series, Otis competes with a rival sex therapist at a new school, while Maeve disappears to America. At least, that's what the show is about on paper, and on Wikipedia. Really, the sex clinic is a foil, a thin layer of aluminium over the true focus of the show, keeping it all together so writer Laurie Nunn can discuss everything, from love stories to sexual harassment to making a delicious salad. But fundamentally, Sex Education is about nostalgia. A whole bunch of nostalgias actually, but let's talk about the obvious one first. The nostalgia of adolescence. Sex Education is a rose-tinted depiction of life as you turn over from being a child into being something approximating an adult. Unless your name is Adam Groff. Our protagonist Otis strives to offer good advice to his fellow students as they age up, but he's also struggling himself. First unable to wank, then wanking everywhere. First unable to have sex, then unable to please. Asa Butterfield. More like Asa Butterfingers. Oh god. So Otis battles through all these challenges in a charming way, playing that classic stereotype of the lovable outsider.
You are like a pimp, and not the cool Snoop Dogg kind.
And as the year progresses, we're also shown the school dance, school detention, and that other teenage mainstay, house parties where you alienate everyone you love. But most tellingly, there's unrequited love. Scene after scene after scene of it.
I love you.
Oh. That's nice.
Within this question of adolescence, we do have a fair bit of sex chat. Beyond Otis, we see Eric, then Adam, then Ola, then Jackson, then Cal struggle with their feelings and their sexualities. Characters face very present issues of gender as well. In the final series, we see welcome discussion of relationships that aren't perfect, and some genuinely impressive TV renditions of dissociation and anxiety. But I won't spoil them for you. Fundamentally, this Netflix-tinted adolescence is a great way to discuss both the long-standing and contemporary challenges of growing up, thanks to the immense value that teenagers steep in individual social interactions. Like a poorly brewed groupthink tea of cliquey conduct. When Sex Education began, the characters were at the start of what us Brits call sixth form, and by now, they're basically at the end. They've f***ing struggled through everything there is to struggle through. Camping in the British countryside, a goat. But let's be honest, the picture Sex Education paints isn't just any school. It's a school coded by a particular range of signifiers. So as umpteen video essays, news stories and clickbait articles have tackled this already, I'll try and be brief. If you've watched Sex Education, you've probably noticed that it's a sort of peculiar halfway house between British and American influences. Moordale Secondary School looks more like one of those mega high school musical style colleges. Just look to that vast swimming pool, vaster auditorium, vast-ish cafeteria, and generally unvast but still pretty American classrooms. And some British schools do have lockers, but these ones are definitely drawn from Americana. Then there's the way people dress. Maybe baseball jackets were still in vogue when Series 1 came out, but they're very much a mainstay of frat boy fashion, as is the emblazoned logo that shows up everywhere. Even Grainge Hill can get that kind of coverage. Speaking of Grainge Hill though, do any of you know what Grainge Hill is? The show does definitely speak to some hardcore British tropes as well. Long bike rides, caravan parks, a series of high-stakes scenes that take place entirely in a British corner shop. People call each other Muppets.
Hey, Muppet.
They call it a courgette, not a zucchini.
Courgette wanker.
Amy says she ate 4 packets of crumpets.
I ate 4 packets of crumpets and I think my clip might drop off.
That doesn't fly in Brooklyn. Neither does Stephen Fry. What's more, the show uses several explicit British idiomatic phrases in relation to sex that are too lewd for this particular YouTube channel. People take their dogs out for a show. That's not one of the idioms. So I suppose I'm disagreeing with video essay final boss Tom Nicholas here. He's much bigger than me and has much higher stats, so I may be killed. But I don't think sex education is trying to be international. No! It's fundamentally British.
Like stale crisps.
And when it is American, it's American for a very specific reason. Let me explain. What is the theory of nostalgia?
I don't know.
Well, it's more complex than you might think. Coined by the Swiss physician Johannes Hofer, nostalgia was originally a disease caused by a prolonged and usually involuntary absence from home. People died of nostalgia, but that's not quite what nostalgia means now.
It means exactly the opposite of that.
Gradually, its meaning became more semantic, reaching its definitive moment with Friedrich Jameson. Jameson dedicated an entire chapter to it in his Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism. He zeroed in on the nostalgia film in which the tone and style of a whole epoch becomes, in effect, the central character. In becoming a character, a period of time turns into an imitation of its real self. To describe this, Jameson used the term nostalgia mode to mean a new connotation of pastness and pseudo-historical depth in which the history of aesthetic styles displaces real history. On this basis, Jameson suggested that nostalgia can be used to create cultural products. A sense of the past can be marketized through the glossy qualities of the image and turned into something to buy, not just as a symbol of pastness, but a specific 1930s-ness or 1950s-ness. This point seems pretty salient in the 2020s, where the generational cycle has seen 90s trends recur and inexplicably made mixtapes fashionable. We're buying references to the 90s because we like the vintage. Okay, that is just straight Vinto. That's the nostalgia mode then. Buying a sense of the decade, an extrapolated set of ideas that can symbolise the era without actually carrying its material conditions. Because the 90s were actually pretty bum. Jameson's theory was the foundation for a guy called Paul Grainge, who thought that there was a difference between the nostalgia that struck Hoffer's patience and the nostalgia that tried Jameson's patience. While Jameson called the latter nostalgia mode, Grainge called the former nostalgia mood, a structure of feeling or affective and experiential discourse. It seems pretty persuasive that some nostalgia can exist degrees apart from cultural consumption. For example, I've yet to see a feature film of the time I pissed myself in Year 3 English. Not that I longed for that time. Grainge put the difference like this. If the nostalgia mood is a feeling determined by a concept of longing and loss, the nostalgia mode is a consumable style that has been commonly characterized as amnesiac. The mood-mode distinction is not a binary opposition, but instead represents the conceptual tendencies of a theoretical continuum. So let me explain how all this relates to sex education. If we're breaking things down into nostalgia mode versus nostalgia mood, let's take the mode first. And let's be clear, in this regard there's a whole maelstrom of 1980s-ness at play in the show. The soundtrack, for example. We've got This Is the Day, Boys Don't Cry, Dancing With Myself. Ha! They all come from the same decade! What about the technology on show? Well, the MOTs on these vehicles probably expired before your mum. And the TVs are also surprisingly blocky. Yet they're capable of playing what looks distinctly like an Instagram video, which is only right seeing as everyone on set has a smartphone. As lead writer Laurie Nunn put it, the world that the fictitious Moordale High students live in exists in a kind of pop cultural no man's land. Everyone's outfits have a slight throwback vibe, but every now and then someone whips out an iPhone. That's not the only thing they whip out, Laurie. Machismo. What about the American influences I mentioned earlier? Well, see, the 1980s were the golden age of the American coming-of-age film, thanks in no small part to writer-director John Hughes. The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Pretty in Pink, it was all bopping off here. And if you look at some of the scenes and outfit choices in Sex Education, you'll see the clear allusions, not just to this period in general, but those films in specifics. But that's all they are, allusions. The series makes no pretensions to anchor itself in the 80s, or indeed any time. Laurie Nunn sees her creation as a comic book world of teenage life. In fact, that seems clearer than ever in Series 4, set in an almost timeless new location that's more colourful and more inclined to the goals of the show than any of its previous environments. The show was never really an 80s pastiche. Instead, I'd argue that its general drive to echo the nostalgia mode of 1980s-ness through nods to John Hughes and his ilk helped support the nostalgia mood of adolescence, providing anchors to our own experiences. Sex Education's moments of social conflict, finding yourself, and unrequited love speak to our nostalgia mood as individuals, the way we recall our time at school. Then, these moments get reinforced by the nostalgia mode of the 1980s, shooting our teenage memories through this specular filter of 1980s-ness makes them hit harder than they would otherwise, in this special love letter format. And, okay, while it's not easy to say this, I think that's why some of the moments in Season 4 fall flat. They don't have the support of the setting to carry through their ideas. It's the stories we already relate to that carry through best in this environment that seems like less of an obvious homage to something intimately 80s. So let's ask the big question. Should the final season of Sex Education have stuck with this nostalgic lens? Well, I'm inclined to think that the tender, thoughtful way that Sex Education discusses personal issues and dismisses stereotypes
You're going to therapize me.
suggests that its nostalgic tendency helps make it resonate, particularly regarding its more literal, pubescent interpretation of coming of age. The theorists seem to agree with me here. Grainge ends with the rejection of totalizing postmodernist claims that cultural amnesia is a fait accompli, and so suggests a potential association between memory and the nostalgia mood. In other words, Sex Education proves that an appeal to schlocky nostalgia can sometimes enhance our ability to empathise with what we see on screen. Let's be honest, if we rewatch those classic coming-of-age films now, they can be a little problematic. But when Sex Education reapplies those tropes and brings them into the present day, the nostalgia mode we imagine can be reformulated to give resonance to trans and non-binary lives, caring responsibilities, and even a goddamn goat. In fact, it's not just that the show reshapes these tropes, it thoroughly subverts them. The bully who mashes people's heads in because of toxic masculinity, the rebel who doesn't trust people because she can't trust her closest family, the mean girl who exerts control at school because she's losing it at home. But while it's doing all this, Sex Education still propels the nostalgia mood, reminding us of our own dreamy little ideas of secondary school. When you look back, you might see yourself as a Maeve Wiley fueled feminist, an effervescent Eric Effiong embodier, or a mortified Otis Milburn type. Point being, Sex Education understands that nostalgia can make us reconsider the present, just as much as it makes us yearn for the past. And it can be empowering for the lives we lead today. Whoever you were when you were a teen, and whoever you are now, Sex Education sees you.
See, no one's ever explained it to me like this before.